The thing about working with the public in remote places is that you learn to read patterns in human noise. After 12 years maintaining the trails through Gallatin Peak Preserve, I have heard every variation of excitement, complaint, and casual conversation that filtered up from the campgrounds below. But on the morning we found the first signs, there was a quality to the radio chatter that made my shoulders tighten. Not fear yet, just absence. The kind of silence that tells you someone has stopped talking because they noticed something was wrong. My name sits somewhere at the bottom of a registry that nobody reads anymore. I am a ranger, one of 6 who manage this stretch of forest and the 23 established campsites scattered across the preserve. The job means I walk these trails every season, clear fallen timber, maintain the water systems, and manage the flow of visitors who come seeking what they imagine wilderness offers them. Most years, the hardest part is convincing people to pack out their trash. The message came through at 6 in the morning. Peter Foster had reported unusual activity near the Northern Ridge Trail. He was being vague about it, which was not his pattern. I have worked with Peter 3 times before, always on search and rescue protocols for lost hikers. He is methodical. He does not panic. When he said something was wrong with the way the forest was behaving, I listened. I drove out to Creek Junction where the main access road meets the preservation boundary. The facility there houses our equipment, records, and serves as a staging point for anything serious. The parking area was already occupied by 2 vehicles. Gloria Gonzalez, who manages the northern sector campsites, was standing beside her truck with a thermos of coffee and the expression that suggested she had not slept. Gloria is 58 years old and has been with the service longer than I have. She has seen the preserve through drought years and flood years. She has managed bear incidents and lost children. She is not easily disturbed. 3 separate reports, she said before I even closed my truck door. All coming in after sunset yesterday. Campers at sites 7 and 9, and then Peter up on his equipment check. They all reported hearing sounds consistent with a large animal moving through the perimeter zone. Large how? I asked. They did not know, Gloria said. That is the problem. They could not identify it. Most people hear something they cannot name and they think it is a bear or a cougar and they report it immediately. These calls, they were confused calls. The people were uncertain what they were describing. Vincent Bryant arrived 20 minutes later. Vincent is the preserve's resource coordinator, 55 years old, desk person who manages budgets and personnel and spent most of his time in the office in the valley below. He should not have been here this early. The fact that Gloria had called him down suggested something was moving beyond routine incident protocol. 4 sites are requesting early checkout, Vincent said, holding up his tablet. The Diaz family, the Alexanders, the Hayeses, and 1 more. They all logged it within an hour of each other. No specific threat, just discomfort. That is going to hurt the revenue numbers for the month. But I had Gloria call them back to make sure they were not in active distress. And? I asked. They were scared, Vincent said. They would not admit it directly, but every one of them mentioned unusual sounds and unusual animal behavior. One family said their dog had been agitated for hours. The preserve is a place where the animals have learned to tolerate human presence because the humans are temporary. Bears move through camps at night knowing that the campers will be gone in a few days. Elk ignore the hiking trails because they have learned that people do not stay in one place. But there is a boundary in that tolerance. Cross it, and the animals will assert themselves. What Gloria was describing did not sound like asserting boundaries. It sounded like something was stalking the ridge. Sandra Alexander arrived at 8. Sandra is the youth education coordinator, 33 years old, and she had come to see what the emergency was. She was not technically part of the emergency response structure, but she lived in the housing unit adjacent to the preserve, and she knew the terrain and the people better than most of us did. The Alexanders are my cousins, she said immediately. They are not people who scare easy. My cousin Vincent, he grew up around these mountains. If they are leaving early, something is legitimately wrong. I noticed she said Vincent. There are multiple Vincents in the preserve. The way she specified it told me she was thinking about family, not procedure. I want to send patrols up to the northern ridge and the creek zones, I said to Gloria. We do not know what we are dealing with yet, but 4 early checkouts and multiple reports mean we need to see what is making the campers nervous. I will come with you, Sandra said. This needs to be official response, I told her. And that means you need someone who knows these people and these families, Sandra replied. I can help you figure out if this is genuine threat or panic spreading. Besides, I want to know what is happening near the creek zones. I teach children in this preserve. If something is wrong, I need to understand it. She was not wrong. The preserve's education program ran from spring through early fall, and we were right at the edge of that season. If we did not understand what was causing the concern, we might need to shut down programming. Sandra would know which families would accept that decision, and which families would feel threatened by it. All right, I said. You come with me to the ridge. Gloria, you continue monitoring the southern sites and handle the checkouts. Vincent, I need you to pull together anything we have in the system about large predator activity in this zone over the past 2 years. What I did not say was that this felt different. What I did not say was that in 12 years, I had developed a sense for when the preserve was simply operating within its normal parameters, and when something had shifted. I could not name the sensation. It sat at the base of my spine like a weight. Walter Russell was waiting at the parking area of trail marker 12 when Sandra and I arrived at 9:30. Walter is 67, one of the volunteer rangers who helps maintain the more remote trail sections. He has been coming to this preserve for over 40 years, first as a camper with his family, then as someone who became so attached to the place that he simply never left. In his retirement, he volunteers most days of the month, walking sections that we cannot cover with regular staff. I found something you need to see, he said, and he led us immediately off trail. This is where training becomes necessary. Most people would follow an older man into the forest without understanding that they are now part of a chain of documentation and accountability. But I have been trained to notice details. I pulled out my body camera before we went anywhere, made sure the GPS on my radio was active, and told Gloria where we were headed. The thing Walter showed us was a tree, not unusual in itself. We walked past 10,000 trees, but this tree had bark missing, great sections of it stripped away in a pattern that suggested something large had pressed against it with force. The wood underneath was fresh. The damage was recent, maybe hours old. There is more, Walter said. He led us 50 yards deeper, to a depression in the forest floor where the undergrowth had been disturbed in a wide pattern. Leaves and small branches had been scattered. The soil was marked with depressions that could have been footprints, but they were not clear enough to be certain of anything. How big? I asked Walter. Bigger than any bear I have ever seen, he said. Bigger than any cougar. The way this was done, it was not feeding on something. It was not marking territory. It was something moving with purpose through a small space. I photographed everything. Documentation first, interpretation later. But my mind was already running through the possibilities, and I hated where it was going. The afternoon brought Crystal Griffin to our operations center. Crystal is 43 and works as a veterinary professional in the valley. She had come up because she had heard from Yasmin Hayes that something unusual was happening at the preserve, and Yasmin was her partner. Yasmin is 51, a meditation instructor and author who maintains a small cabin property at the preserve's eastern edge through a special use permit. She does workshops here, teaches people how to find peace in wilderness. Yasmin has not answered her phone since yesterday morning, Crystal said, and her voice had lost its professional calm. She said she was going to do a solitary retreat. She usually tells me when she is starting so I can check on her. She did not tell me this time. This was now a missing person situation. Protocol requires immediate notification to the county sheriff and expansion of our response. I put in the call while Crystal was still giving me information about Yasmin's cabin location and her usual routines. What I did not tell Crystal was that Yasmin's cabin sat approximately 200 meters from the location where Walter had found the first signs. Ethan Diaz arrived at 4 in the afternoon in his own vehicle, having heard from his family that they needed to evacuate. Ethan is 39, an accountant who camps at the preserve for 2 weeks every summer, brings his wife and teenage daughter, makes it a tradition. He was not supposed to be here for another week. The fact that his family had checked out early and he was coming back up meant he was taking the situation seriously. My wife and daughter are already at home, he told me. They did not want to say it in the official reports, but they were genuinely frightened. My daughter said she heard something in the woods behind our site that sounded like it was trying to reach them. She said it sounded like nothing she had ever heard before. Can you describe that? I asked. She said it was like a sound a very large animal would make if it was trying to communicate, but nothing she had learned about exists that makes sounds like that. She said it made her feel like it understood English, like it was trying to form words. I wrote that down. I did not comment on it. By the end of that first day, we had assembled our team. 8 of us. 8 people who were going to have to understand what was moving through Gallatin Peak Preserve and whether it represented a genuine threat to the 146 people currently camping on the grounds. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the ranger station with the weather station reports and the GPS tracking data and the records of previous unusual activity. The preserve had been established 52 years ago. In that time, there had been exactly 2 reports in the official records of large, unidentified predator activity. Both had been in the 1980s. Both reports had been filed by rangers who were no longer on staff. Neither report had resulted in any confirmed animal sightings or captures. I should have felt relieved that we were looking at a pattern of rare occurrences. Instead, I felt the weight at the base of my spine turn into something colder. The forest was saying something, and we were just beginning to understand that we did not want to hear it. Morning of day 2 brought the call from Site 15. A family group of 4 had abandoned their campsite entirely, left their tent and gear, and walked out to the access road. They flagged down a volunteer from the education program and demanded immediate evacuation. They reported that something had circled their tent site for most of the night. Something large enough to shake the tent structure. Something that made sounds that were not consistent with any known animal behavior. Gloria processed their checkout while I took Sandra and Walter back into the forest. We needed to see the site. We needed to understand the pattern. What we found at Site 15 told a story. The tent had been approached from multiple angles. The ground around it showed signs of large feet, heavy enough to compress the soil. But here is what made my training conflict with what I was seeing. The pattern suggested the animal had not been trying to get into the tent. It had been circling, observing, waiting. For what? Sandra asked, and her voice had lost its earlier confidence. For them to come out, I said. Walter was studying the tree line. It knows how camps work, he said quietly. It knows people sleep in tents. It understands the structure. This is not an animal acting on instinct. This is an animal problem solving. By noon, I had put out an official preserve alert. No unauthorized hiking on the northern sector trails. All campsites were being actively monitored. We were implementing a ranger presence protocol that meant one of us would be visible on the roads and at the major access points every hour the preserve was open. This should have calmed people. Official response, visible presence, clear communication. Instead, it seemed to accelerate the fear. By evening, we had 14 families requesting early checkout. By midnight, we had 23. The preserve's central booking system was showing cancellations pouring in for the next 3 months. What had been a quiet, normal season was turning into a financial disaster. Vincent handled the administrative side. He made calls to the county, filed reports with the department office, worked on damage control with the regional media who had picked up the story. Some local news outlet had run a headline about an unidentified large predator activity at the preserve, and that headline had done more to spread panic than any of our official warnings had done to create focus. But there was something else happening beneath the surface. On the second night, when I was out doing a security patrol of the main campground area, I realized that the campers who remained were no longer afraid in the way they had been. The early fear had been shock and confusion. This new fear was different. This was the fear of people who had begun to understand that something was aware of them. Individually, I stood at the edge of Site 4 and watched a family sitting around a small campfire. They had a child, maybe 8 years old, who kept looking into the forest with an expression that suggested she was waiting for something to look back. The parents were not making her stop. They were just watching the forest too. "You see it," Peter said. He had come up beside me without me noticing. Peter has that quality. He moves quietly, observes more than he speaks. The shift. "Yes," I said. "This is not a bear or a cougar," Peter said. "Any of those animals would have attacked already or moved on. This is something that is making a decision about what it wants to do. It is not afraid of us. It might not even be particularly hungry. It is interested. In what? I asked. In whether we belong here, Peter said. The second night brought no new incidents, which was somehow worse than if there had been. The waiting was doing something to people's nerves. By the third morning, only 18 campsites were occupied out of the 23. The preserve was becoming a place of absence. Crystal had not left. She was staying at the ranger station, sleeping on the emergency cot, waiting for any word about Yasmin. She had tried to reach Yasmin's cabin on the first day, but the access road was technically impassable without four-wheel drive, and with all of us focused on the security situation, we had not prioritized getting through. On the morning of the third day, I made the decision to clear the access road and reach the cabin. I am coming, Crystal said immediately. This is outside the normal protocol, I told her. Yasmin is my partner, Crystal said. I am coming. So we went. Myself, Crystal, and Sandra. We took an all-terrain vehicle and pushed through the overgrown section of road that led to Yasmin's retreat cabin. The route took us through the deepest forest section of the preserve, the section where the trails end and only the oldest paths remained, paths that most people did not know existed. As we drove, I became aware of something that the open daylight and the presence of others had been hiding. We were being watched, not in the way you might be watched by someone who is curious. In the way you are watched by something that is deciding whether you are a threat or an opportunity. The vehicle engine noise should have kept anything away. Machines make noise that most animals find threatening. But 3 times during that drive, I saw movement in the tree line, large movements. Movements consistent with something that weighed more than any bear and moved with more purpose than any cougar I had ever heard about. Stop, Sandra said. I stopped the vehicle. We all felt it at the same time. The absence of sound. The forest had gone completely silent. Not just quiet, silent. The kind of silence that happens when every living thing stops moving and stops making noise because something larger is demanding attention. Go, Crystal said. Just go forward. I accelerated. The vehicle lurched over a fallen log and we pushed through. And behind us I heard something that I did not want to hear. Something was keeping pace with us. Something large enough to be heard over the vehicle engine, keeping distance but maintaining contact, moving through the forest with a gait that suggested it knew exactly where we were going. We reached Yasmin's cabin 10 minutes later. It was a small, well-maintained structure with large windows and a wraparound porch. Everything appeared normal, no signs of disturbance, no indication that anything was wrong, but Yasmin's vehicle was there. And Yasmin was inside. She was sitting on the floor of the main room, wrapped in blankets, staring at nothing. She did not react to us entering. She did not react to Crystal calling her name. She was alive, but something in her had stopped working. Yasmin, Crystal said, kneeling beside her. Yasmin, can you hear me? Yasmin's eyes moved slightly, acknowledging Crystal's presence but not quite connecting to it. How long has she been like this? I asked. There were 3 days of dishes in the sink. There was food left out that had begun to decay. There was evidence that Yasmin had been here, had eaten, had moved around the cabin. But there was also evidence that she had stopped doing those things and had simply sat down and stopped. We got her into the vehicle. She did not resist. She did not help. She was a weight that we moved from one place to another. And when we moved her, she came with us the way an object comes with you, with no will of its own. As we drove back toward the ranger station, I kept watching the tree line. The silence had not returned. The forest had resumed its normal background noise, but something had happened while we were in that cabin. Something had decided to let us leave, or something had decided that it did not need us. Back at the ranger station, we got Yasmin into medical care. There was a professional EMT available on call for the preserve district, and she arrived within 20 minutes. The EMT could find nothing physically wrong with Yasmin. Blood pressure normal, heart rate normal, temperature normal. But Yasmin would not respond to questions. She would not make eye contact. She seemed to be aware of the people around her only in the most basic sense, the way a plant is aware of the sun. Psychological break, the EMT suggested. Traumatic exposure to something. She needs inpatient assessment. I am calling for transport to the regional hospital. We did not tell the EMT about the sounds or the sightings. We did not mention the large animal keeping pace with our vehicle. That information would have escalated the situation beyond what we could contain. But I was beginning to understand something. The preserve was not being randomly threatened by an unidentified predator. Something was hunting here. Something was making choices. And something had decided that whatever Yasmin had seen or understood on the second night was something that needed to be removed from the equation. By the evening of the third day, only 8 campsites remained occupied. The preserve that should have held 40 or 50 human presences was now nearly empty. That night, when I finally had a moment alone, I pulled out my personal journal and wrote something I had been thinking but had not said aloud. This is not about survival. This is about dominance. Something is asserting that this forest belongs to it, not to us. And it is teaching us that lesson. The weight at the base of my spine had become a constant thing now, like a stone that I carried with me everywhere I went. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan Diaz arrived at the ranger station with his vehicle packed. He was not leaving because he was scared. He was leaving because he had realized something, and he needed to tell us before he went. My family did not just hear something, Ethan said. Something tried to get into our tent on the first night. My daughter saw it. She saw its arm reaching under the tent fabric. She said the arm was huge, bigger than any human arm. She said she could see hair, but hair different from any animal. Hair that looked almost human. Why did you not report this? I asked. Because I did not believe her, Ethan said. Because it sounded impossible. Because I told myself my daughter had been scared, and her brain had created an image that made sense to her fear. But sitting alone with my wife at home, thinking about what my daughter said, I started to believe her, and I realized I needed to tell someone who would understand what that means. What it meant was that we were no longer dealing with theoretical threat. We were dealing with direct contact. I assembled the team. All of us. Peter, Gloria, Vincent, Sandra, Walter, Crystal, Ethan, and Yasmin's position was still empty, her hospital transfer having taken her out of preserve operations. We have 6 days of consistent sighting reports, I said, laying out what we knew. We have 4 direct confrontations. We have 1 missing person who is currently non-responsive in medical care. We have a pattern of behavior that suggests intelligent pursuit and targeting. This is no longer a wildlife incident. This is an active threat situation. You want to hunt it? Vincent said. I want to understand it, I corrected him. But yes, if understanding it means we have to locate it, then we locate it. With what resources? Gloria asked. We can call in the county, but any official response is going to require massive mobilization. That is going to require us admitting that we do not know what this is. That is going to require us to start using words like creature and monster. That is going to end this preserve's ability to operate. The preserve is already ending, Vincent said quietly. The booking cancellations have gone past the point where we can recover this season financially. If we are going to do something, we should do it before the media turns this into a national story. What do you propose? Peter asked. A night operation, I said. Tonight. All of us, armed, equipped, armed with thermal imaging and night vision. We patrol the northern sector where most of the activity has been concentrated. We track this thing, and we either kill it or we drive it out of the preserve. And if we kill it and it is not what we think it is? Walter asked quietly. If we kill something that turned out to be protected, or endangered, or not actually the threat we thought it was, then we deal with that, I said. But right now, we have a threat that is actively targeting people, targeting them specifically. We do not have the luxury of being uncertain. The preparation took most of the day. We checked weapons, confirmed ammunition, confirmed that everyone was trained on the thermal imaging equipment. We marked our positions and established communication protocols. We discussed scenarios and responses. As I went through each step, I became aware of something that nobody was saying aloud. We were scared, not the kind of fear that comes from uncertainty. The kind of fear that comes from knowing you are about to do something that might confirm everything you have been trying not to think about. As sunset approached, Crystal asked to speak to me privately. Yasmin said something, Crystal said, before they transported her. She said it only once, and then she did not speak again. She said, "It was trying to tell me something. It was trying to communicate. It was trying to make me understand that this place does not belong to us anymore." And what do you think she meant? I asked. I think, Crystal said slowly, that Yasmin encountered something intelligent. I think it showed her something or told her something, and I think whatever she experienced broke something inside her. Not her sanity, her sense of belonging, her sense of certainty about the world and our place in it. What could possibly tell a human being that? I asked. Only something that had shown her proof, Crystal said. Only something that made understanding impossible to deny. As darkness fell, we moved into position. The plan was simple. We would move through the northern sector systematically, in pairs, maintaining radio contact, using thermal imaging to look for heat signatures that did not fit known animal profiles. When we found something, we would pursue and attempt to establish positive identification before taking any action. The thermal imaging had been designed to spot bears or cougars. What we saw in the first hour made us understand that it was not going to be adequate for what we were looking for. Peter and I had taken the trail section that led toward the ridge where Walter had found the first signs. The night was clear, stars visible, the forest illuminated by starlight in a way that made everything look both familiar and alien. The thermal imaging showed us heat signatures constantly, mostly small animals, deer, raccoons, fox. But approximately every 15 minutes, we registered something larger, something moving parallel to our position, something that was always just far enough away that we could not pin down its exact size or shape. It knows we are here, Peter said quietly. It can hear us. It can see us. I guarantee it can track us more effectively than we can track it. Then why is it not attacking? I asked. Because it is deciding, Peter said. Just like it decided to let that vehicle leave with Yasmin. Just like it decided to approach certain tents and not others. This is not an animal operating on instinct. This is something evaluating its options. We were so focused on the thermal imaging and on Peter's observation that neither of us registered what should have been obvious. We had moved away from our planned patrol grid. The forest had guided us slowly, incrementally, toward a destination that was not on our map. It was Peter who first noticed. "We are too far south," he said, checking his GPS. "We have drifted. We need to adjust our position." But when he looked at the GPS, something was wrong. The device was not losing signal. It was not malfunctioning. It was simply showing our position as being something impossible. It showed us in 3 different locations simultaneously. The GPS had stopped working in any meaningful sense. "Radio," I said, reaching for my shoulder unit. No response. The radio showed signal bars full strength, but there was no sound, no static, no voices from the other patrol teams, just dead silence. "We need to move," Peter said, and his voice had lost its calm. "We need to move now." We started back toward our planned route, using the compass and the stars and memory of the forest to navigate. But the forest was not where we had left it. I know how that sounds. I know that geography does not change. Landmarks do not move. But in the darkness, following a compass bearing through territory that should have been familiar, we found ourselves in a section of forest that neither of us recognized. The trees were larger here. The undergrowth was denser. The silence was absolute. And then we found the clearing. It was a natural break in the forest, a section where some ancient windfall had taken down the trees and cleared space. In that clearing, silhouetted against the starlight, we saw it. I cannot tell you its exact shape, because it did not have one in the way my brain could process. It was large, larger than any bear by a factor I could not calculate. It was covered in hair, yes, but hair that moved independently of any wind. Hair that seemed to shift and change color in the starlight. It was standing upright, definitely upright, on 2 legs in a posture that was almost human, but not quite. The arms were too long, the shoulders were too broad. The head was positioned at an angle that no human skull could achieve. It turned and looked at us. I cannot explain what happened next. I cannot explain how I know it was looking at us when it had nothing that resembled human eyes. But I knew, in the deepest part of my nervous system, in the part that evolved before language, I knew that something was watching us with complete awareness and complete intention. "Do not move," Peter whispered. We did not move. The thing in the clearing stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then, slowly it turned away. It did not run. It did not bound or leap or move in any way that was consistent with animal locomotion. It simply walked. Backward first, maintaining eye contact, then turning and walking toward the far edge of the clearing where the darkness was absolute. When it reached the tree line, it stopped, and then I heard it. A sound that I had not heard before in my 12 years in this preserve. A sound that Ethan's daughter had tried to describe. A sound that Yasmin had evidently heard enough to let it break her mind. It was a call. But not an animal call. It was shaped like language. It had the cadence of communication. It rose and fell with intention. It was expressing something, and every fiber of my body understood that it was addressing us, speaking to us, trying to make us understand that it had allowed us to see it, that it had shown us something, that we had been given knowledge, and knowledge has consequences. Then it was gone. We made it back to the ranger station at 3 in the morning. Neither of us spoke about what we had seen. We debriefed with the other patrol teams. Walter and Gloria reported no significant findings. Sandra and Vincent reported locating 3 heat signatures that did not match known profiles, but they had lost them after 15 minutes. None of them said their radios had stopped working. None of them said they had become lost in forest they knew. At dawn, I found them in small groups, not speaking to each other. All of them looking at something that none of us could see. On the morning of the 5th day, Gloria did not come to the morning briefing. Crystal went to check on her and found her in her quarters, packing her personal items. Gloria was leaving. She would not say where she was going. She would only say that she could not stay. 20 years, she said to Crystal, and her voice was hollow. I have worked for this preserve for 20 years. I have made this place my professional life. But I cannot stay here. I know what is in this forest now. I know what has been here longer than we have been here. I know what our presence means to it, and I cannot stay. She was gone by noon. Vincent received a call from the regional office that morning. The preserve's permit to operate was being suspended pending a wildlife assessment. No new campers were being accepted. Current campers were being strongly encouraged to relocate. The official reason was environmental protection, pending investigation. The real reason was that the department did not want to be liable for what happened next. Peter came to me with something he had been holding back. I need to show you something in the records, he said. Something in the historical archive. Something that you need to know. He pulled up old preserved documentation, files from the 1980s, the same period when those 2 ranger reports of unusual activity had been filed. But he did not stop at the reports. He went deeper. There were photographs, not official wildlife documentation, personal photographs, handwritten notes and margins. The photographs showed the preserve, but they showed it as it had existed decades before our current trails and campsites. They showed a different layout, different structures. One set of photographs showed what looked like a settlement. Not a camping structure, not a ranger station, an actual settlement. Small buildings arranged in a pattern. And in the background of the photographs, there were trees being cut. There was evidence of organized resource extraction. These are from 1952, Peter said, before the preserve was established, before this land was protected, before the camping and the education programs and all of the structures we have built. Someone tried to develop this land. Someone tried to extract resources from this forest. What happened? I asked. The project was abandoned, Peter said. No official reason. No environmental assessment, no legal dispute. The contractor simply stopped work and left. Within 6 months, the project was terminated. Within 8 years, the land was purchased by the state and designated as a preserve. You think something drove them out? I asked. I know something drove them out, Peter said. I found a report filed by the original project manager. It was never officially submitted. It was in a personal diary that ended up in the archive. He wrote about strange sounds at night. He wrote about equipment being damaged in ways that made no sense. He wrote about the workers becoming terrified. He wrote about seeing something that he could not identify. And then he wrote that they had stopped trying to understand it. They just left. They realized that this place did not want them, and they left. It did not want them, I repeated. That was his phrase, Peter said. Not it did not attack them. Not it was a threat. It did not want them. It is a distinction that I think matters. On the evening of the 5th day, Ethan came back to the preserve. Not to camp, to help. He said his family was safe at home, and they could not be safer anywhere else, so he was going to help us understand what was happening. You think your family is safer at home than here? I asked him. I know they are, Ethan said. Because my daughter told me. She said that thing, whatever it is not interested in chasing us away from the preserve. It is interested in chasing us away from here specifically. It is trying to reclaim this space. It is not trying to establish dominance over the entire world, just over this forest. It was the most useful observation we had received from anyone outside the ranger staff. That night, I made a decision that went against every protocol and procedure I had been trained to follow. I decided to go into the forest alone. Sandra tried to stop me. Crystal tried to stop me. Peter did not try to stop me because he understood. Sometimes you need to have a conversation, and sometimes that conversation requires you to be alone. I took nothing. No weapon, no radio, no thermal imaging. I walked into the forest after sunset, and I waited to see if it would come. It took 1 hour. 1 hour of standing in a small clearing and waiting, and then it emerged from the tree line. This time I could see it more clearly. The absence of artificial light made its form more apparent. It was not a bear. It was not a cougar. It was not anything that had an official scientific classification that I was aware of. It was massive, covered in dense hair that was darker than the night around it, and it was shaped like something that had learned human form and then decided to express it in its own way. "You do not have to fear me," I said aloud. "I do not know if it heard words. I do not know if it understood English." But it stopped moving. It lowered itself to a crouch, and it watched me. "I understand now," I said. "I understand what Yasmin understood. This is your place. This forest belongs to you. We came here thinking we were administrators, thinking we were in charge of this land. But we were guests. We were temporary. We were here at your tolerance." It made a sound. Not the communicative call from the night before. Something different. Something that might have been acknowledgement. "What do you want from us?" I asked. And then something happened that I still cannot explain. It was not telepathy. There was no sudden influx of knowledge. But I found myself understanding something that had not been told to me in words. I found myself knowing that the answer to my question was simple. "Leave." "All of us?" I asked. It made another sound. A different sound. One that, if I had to translate it, sounded like agreement with conditions. "Not all of us permanently." The sound it made then was almost gentle. In that sound I heard something like acceptance. Not forgiveness, not mercy, just acceptance that humans had built their structures here and had committed to maintenance of this space, and it was willing to tolerate that. But it was not willing to tolerate expansion. It was not willing to tolerate hunting on its terms. It was not willing to tolerate ignorance of its presence. "The campers need to go," I said. The sound was like yes. "And you will stop hunting them?" The sound was complicated. In that complicated sound I heard hierarchy. I heard the concept that hunting would continue, but hunting would be focused. Hunting would be specific. Hunting would target those who had shown disrespect for the space. "The families who are still here," I said. "Will you let them leave safely?" For a long moment it did not move. For a long moment I could feel the weight of its consideration. Then it made a new sound, and in that sound I heard something that I might almost call sadness. "Yes." I turned to walk away, and it did not stop me. By morning, I had assembled the team and given them the information. Not all of it. I did not tell them about my conversation with the thing in the forest. I told them what we had learned from observation. I told them that the threat would end if we implemented specific protocols. "We need to immediately close the northern sector camping areas," I said. "We need to restrict access to preserved trails for the next 3 months. We need to implement a ranger-only access policy, and we need to make it permanent. No public access to the deep forest sections. No guide-led expeditions beyond the marked trails. No expansion of infrastructure." "That is essentially shutting down the preserve," Vincent said. "That is repurposing the preserve," I corrected him. "The preserve was established to protect this forest. If we truly want to protect it, we do what it requires us to do." "You are giving up?" Walter asked. "I am accepting that we are not in control here," I said. "I am accepting that there is something in this forest that has a claim on this space that is older and deeper than our claim. And I am accepting that our job is not to dominate this space. Our job is to manage human interaction with it appropriately." "And what about the families who are still camping?" Sandra asked. "How do we explain this to them?" "We tell them there is a large predator that is territory defending," I said. "We tell them the truth. just framed in language that is accurate but does not inspire panic. We offer them compensation for their interrupted vacation. We help them leave safely. And if they do not want to leave, Peter asked. They will, I said, because I am going to make sure they understand the magnitude of the situation. I am going to make sure they know that continuing to camp here is a choice with real consequences. The next 24 hours were the most difficult of my career. We approached each camping group, we explained the situation, we offered compensation, and we made it clear that the preserve was no longer safe for human recreation. There was anger, there was accusation, there was disbelief, but there was no resistance. By evening of that day, the preserve held no human campers. Only the ranger staff remained. Only those of us who had committed to maintaining this space and protecting it in its natural state. That night, I walked to the edge of the preserve and I waited. It did not come. I had not expected it to. The communication had been made. The understanding had been reached. What needed to happen now would happen in the silence and in the absence of direct confrontation. Walter came to find me in the morning. I am retiring, he said. I have decided to leave. 40 years I came to this preserve, and I loved this place. But I cannot love it the way it needs to be loved. I cannot accept what lives here the way I need to accept it. So I am going to let someone else do that work. By the end of the week, only Peter, Sandra, and I remained on the ranger staff. Gloria had relocated. Crystal had gone back to her practice. Vincent had been reassigned to another facility. Ethan had returned to his family. Yasmin remained in the hospital for 2 more weeks. When she was finally released, she did not return to her cabin. She filed paperwork to terminate her special use permit. She sent a message through Crystal saying that she had learned something about the world that made it impossible for her to maintain the retreat space. She said that some places do not need people to teach them peace. Some places already are peace, and people should respect that. In the official records, the preserve remained open. The campgrounds were closed for environmental restoration. The access trails were rerouted. The ranger staff was reduced to minimal presence, with monitoring systems installed to track any unusual activity. But that was not what was happening. What was happening was that we were all learning to exist in a space that was not ours to control. Peter understood it. Sandra understood it. And I understood it more deeply than anyone, because I had stood in front of it and had felt the weight of its presence. 3 months after that night, I stood in the ranger station and looked at the GPS data, the thermal imaging records, the seasonal activity logs. All of it showed normal forest function. All of it showed healthy animal populations. All of it showed a preserve at ecological stability. What none of it showed was the presence of the thing that lived here. But I knew it was here. I knew it was watching. I knew that it had decided to tolerate our presence as long as we showed respect for the space. In my personal journal, I wrote something on that 3-month anniversary. I have made peace with the fact that I do not understand this place. I have made peace with the fact that there is something here that is far older and far more deeply connected to this forest than I will ever be. I have made peace with the fact that my job is not to control or even to fully comprehend, but simply to maintain the boundaries that keep humans from overextending their presence in a space that was never truly theirs to claim. Sometimes, when I am walking the trails at dawn, I hear a sound carried on the wind. It is the sound I heard that night in the clearing. It is shaped like language. It is expressing something that I cannot quite translate into human words, but I understand its meaning. This is where I live now. This is the place that has decided to keep me. And I have decided, finally, to accept that I am not the keeper of this preserve. I am just permitted to be here. The last day of summer came with clear skies, and the particular quality of light that makes you feel like the forest is breathing. I took an evening patrol of the northern trails, the trails where this all began. As I walked, I became aware that I was being followed. I did not stop. I did not fear. I simply walked and I let it walk behind me. And I understood that this was as close as we would come to companionship in this space. When I reached the ridge where Walter had first found the signs, I turned and looked back. The trail was empty. The forest was still. But I could feel its presence, could feel it was there, just beyond the edge of perception. Thank you, I said aloud, for teaching us, for showing us, for not destroying us when you could have. The wind moved through the trees. The sound it made was almost like acknowledgement. I walked back toward the ranger station as darkness fell, and I did not look back again. This is what I know now. This is what 3 people in the ranger service know, and what nobody else needs to know. There are places on this earth that do not belong to us. There are spaces that have their own inhabitants, their own rules, their own histories that reach back far beyond our capacity to measure. If we are lucky, if we show respect, we are allowed to exist at the edges of those places. We are allowed to maintain them. We are allowed to protect them. We are allowed to walk through them, but we are not allowed to own them. And now, every time I walk into this forest, I walk with that understanding held close. And I sleep better knowing that there are still places on this earth where human dominance has not yet reached, where something older is still in control. The preserve knows. The preserve has always known. And now, finally, we know too. The first campers will be allowed back after next spring. We will open the campgrounds again. We will maintain the trails and the facilities. We will allow the education programs to resume. But we will do it differently now. We will do it with respect. We will do it with understanding. We will do it with the knowledge that we are here at sufferance, and that sufferance can be withdrawn. And I will walk these trails, and I will maintain this place, and I will keep the secret that needs to be kept, because some truths are too large for the world to hold. Some truths should remain in the forest, where they belong. The screaming came at 3 in the morning, and nobody who heard it would ever describe the sound as human. I had been working as a ranger in Barrow for 7 years by that point. 7 years of Arctic winds that could strip the skin from your face, of ice so thick it seemed to have its own gravity, pulling down everything warm and alive. I knew this place. I knew its rhythms, its moods, the way the darkness in winter could make you understand what despair actually meant. But I had never heard anything like that sound. My name is James. That is all you need to know about who I am. Everything else that matters happened in those 10 days. Everything else that mattered ended in ways I still do not fully comprehend. The camp was supposed to be small, controlled. 8 of us total, including myself. Mark Thompson, the oldest at 65, had led more Arctic expeditions than I could count. Stephanie White, 40 years old, served as the camp coordinator. She kept things organized, kept morale up when the cold threatened to break us all. Anthony Lee, at 37, was technically listed as a research associate, though I never quite understood what he was researching. His job seemed to involve taking notes and asking questions that nobody wanted to answer. Heather Perez, 49, was our communications specialist, keeping the satellite links alive so we could send updates to the university in Anchorage. Stephen Harris and Kimberly Sanchez were there for support roles, equipment maintenance, and supply management. And then there was Andrew Clark, 32, the youngest among us, whose primary function was physical labor and his willingness to venture further into the wilderness than the rest of us thought sensible. We had arrived at the camp 2 weeks prior. It sat on the northern edge of the Pingo Valley, a place of geological oddity where ancient ice formations pushed up through the permafrost like the bones of long-dead creatures. The university wanted data on environmental shifts, on how the Arctic was changing. I was there in my official capacity as a ranger to ensure safety and document wildlife activity. I should have known better. I should have known that some places keep their secrets for reasons. The screaming on that third night did not sound like an animal. That was the first terrible thing. It contained too much variation, too much what I can only describe as intentionality. It started high, almost a shriek, then descended into something guttural and wrong. It lasted perhaps 15 seconds, then cut off with an abruptness that suggested violence rather than conclusion. Everyone came out of their tents. The cold hit like a physical blow, 15 degrees below zero, with winds that made thinking difficult. The sky held the deep purple blue of the transitional season, not quite the full darkness of polar night, not yet the extended day of summer. The light was wrong that night. I remember noticing that. It was wrong in a way I could not identify. Mark was the first to speak. He stood in heavy thermal layers, his beard already crusting with moisture from his breath. His face was the color of weathered leather. "That came from the northeast," he said. "Perhaps 2 miles. What was it?" Stephanie asked. She held herself carefully, controlled. but I could see the tension in her jaw. "Probably a seal under stress," I offered, though I knew it was not. "The ice can make sounds carry unpredictably." Nobody believed me. I could see they did not believe me in their faces, in the way they looked toward the direction from which the sound had come. "We should check the perimeter," Andrew said. He was already moving back toward the equipment tent where we kept the emergency supplies and the GPS units. "It is the middle of the night," Heather said. "We have no visibility. We follow protocol. We wait until morning. We investigate from the camp." Mark nodded slowly. "Heather is right. We secure the camp. Nobody leaves the group. That is the rule." I wanted to protest. I wanted to do something. But I looked at their faces and realized that anything I said would be hollow. We were all afraid. The sound had done that to us instantly, had created a communal understanding that something was wrong in a way we did not have language for. We stayed outside for another 10 minutes, listening. Nothing else came. No further sounds, no movement visible in the landscape around us. Just the wind and the vast indifference of the Arctic and something else. Something I felt rather than heard. A presence that seemed to occupy the space between the stars and the ice. When we finally went back inside our tents, nobody slept. Morning revealed nothing. We found no tracks, no blood, no evidence of whatever had made the sound. The snow around the camp had been undisturbed by anything larger than wind. The ice looked exactly as it had looked the night before, blank and eternal. But something had changed. I could feel it in the way the others moved around the camp, in their glances, in the way conversations would start and then die out halfway through. Anthony seemed particularly affected. He stood looking toward the northeast, the direction the sound had come from, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression distant. "The GPS units are all functioning properly," Andrew reported at mid-morning. "No anomalies in the readings, no equipment failure last night." "Then what made the sound?" Kimberly asked. She was newer to the team, only hired 3 weeks prior. Her voice carried an edge of panic that I found troubling. "Once panic starts spreading, it spreads like infection." "We cannot know that yet," Mark said firmly. He sat at the center of the camp, which we had designated as the supply and briefing area. A large canvas tent with a collapsible table and 2 heating units powered by diesel fuel. "We have 3 days of observations still to complete. We follow our protocols, we complete our work, and we report what we have found to the university." "And if the sound comes again?" Stephen asked quietly. Nobody answered. By the second night, something else had shifted. Heather was missing. She was not in her tent. She was not in any of the common areas. A search of the immediate camp revealed no sign of her. We found her sleeping bag still rolled out, her personal items still arranged on a small crate next to her mat. But Heather herself had vanished sometime during the evening, between dinner and the final equipment check. "She must have stepped outside," Stephanie said. Her voice was brittle. "She went to the latrine tent. Perhaps she needed air. Perhaps she became disoriented." We organized a search immediately. Mark divided us into groups. He and Stephen went northeast, toward where the sound had originated the night before. Andrew and Kimberly searched directly north. Anthony and I went west, away from the valley. Stephanie remained at camp, monitoring the radio frequencies and maintaining the fires. The Arctic in this season is not purely dark, but it is close. The light is thin, unreliable, making distances hard to judge. Shapes become ambiguous. Movement at the edge of vision could be many things. We found the first piece of her clothing perhaps a half-mile from camp, caught on a low outcropping of rock. It was one of her outer thermal gloves, and it was saturated with blood. When I say saturated, I mean that the blood had frozen solid. The glove was stiff with it, articulated at wrong angles by the crystallized moisture. The frozen blood had a dark, almost black color in that thin light. "She was injured," Anthony said. He said it as a statement, flat and absolute. "Or something else wore the glove," I said quietly. He looked at me without expression. We radioed the others. Within 20 minutes, all groups had returned to camp. We had found no further sign of Heather. The radio frequencies remained silent. We placed her emergency beacon on the extended range, but it registered nothing. It was as though she had stepped outside the range of detectable existence. That night, we broke protocol. Everyone remained in the central tent. We kept the heating units running, burning through fuel at a rate that was supposed to be rationed. We kept lights on, multiple lanterns and flashlights, all positioned to eliminate shadows. We kept someone awake at all times in rotating shifts of 2 hours each, watching the tent entrance and monitoring the radio. No one suggested that we should leave. No one mentioned calling for evacuation. It was as though all of us understood something unspoken, something about the place that made the idea of being alone outside seem far more dangerous than staying in this tent together. Mark sat at the table, looking at the map of the region. His fingers traced the perimeter of the Pingo Valley again and again. The valley has certain acoustic properties, he said around midnight. Ice formations create resonance chambers. A sound from one location could seem to originate from elsewhere entirely. And Heather? Stephen asked. Is there an acoustic explanation for her disappearance? Mark did not answer. On the fourth day, we found the remains of a muskox 3 miles north of camp. Andrew discovered it while investigating a deposit of scattered bone we had spotted from the camp. The animal had been massive, 800 pounds or more when alive. Now it was spread across an area of perhaps 30 yards, its internal organs arranged in patterns that seemed too precise to be accidental. There was almost no blood. That was the most disturbing aspect. The ox had been systematically dismantled with such efficiency that it seemed the process itself had been bloodless, or the blood had been collected, removed, taken somewhere for purposes we could not determine. This is fresh, Andrew said. Recent, maybe 12 hours old. Something very large, Kimberly said. She was white beneath her cold weather mask, her eyes too wide. And very hungry, or very deliberate, I said. I was thinking about Heather. I was thinking about how precisely her glove had been placed, caught on that rock, as though it had been left there intentionally for us to find. Anthony had wandered some distance away from the rest of us, moving between the scattered remains with the slow, methodical pace of someone conducting a study. When he finally spoke, his voice came out strange, almost dreamlike. The organs are not in the order of consumption, he said. Look at the arrangement. This was not random predation. This is ritualistic. What are you talking about? Stephanie demanded. The placement of the organs follows a pattern based on traditional anatomical understanding. Whoever did this understood the structure of the animal. They were not just feeding. Mark stepped forward. That is speculation without evidence. Is it? Anthony turned to face us, and something in his expression had changed. It was subtle, just a tightness around the eyes, a slight alteration in the angle of his shoulders. But I saw it. We all saw it. I have read the old accounts, the stories from the indigenous populations here, the accounts of times when things came down from the north, things that hunted in particular ways. Stop it, Mark said flatly. Stop it right now. We will not entertain superstition. Is it superstition if it is following the traditional patterns? Anthony turned back toward the dismantled ox. The Inuit have stories, specific stories about creatures that hunt with intelligence, that take prey not just for food but for other purposes, for uses. We are not having this conversation, Mark said. But we all knew we were. We were all thinking it. We had been thinking it since the screaming, since Heather disappeared, since we found that glove stiff with frozen blood. When we returned to camp that afternoon, Stephanie suggested that we attempt an evacuation request to the university. It was the first time anyone had openly acknowledged that we might need to leave. The weather window is closing, Mark said. We have 3 more days before the conditions will be too poor for helicopter operations. If we request evacuation now, we admit something is wrong. The university will ask questions. There will be investigations. Perhaps that is appropriate, Stephanie said quietly. Perhaps, Mark acknowledged. Or perhaps we have an unexplained disappearance and evidence of predation by a large local animal. That is a story we can tell. It happens in the Arctic. People die here. But Heather did not die from predation, Kimberly said. There was barely any blood on that glove. She could have been injured and then succumbed to cold exposure. Then where is the body? The question hung in the air between us, unanswerable. That night, we broke protocol again. Everyone remained in the central tent. This time, we did not even attempt to maintain separate sleeping areas. We clustered together under heavy blankets, the heating units roaring, consuming fuel as though the supply were infinite. I did not sleep. I watched the shadows on the tent walls and listened to the sounds of the Arctic night, which are not the silence people imagine them to be, but rather a constant, subtle percussion of wind and ice and things that move across the frozen landscape. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something outside the tent. It was not loud. It was barely audible over the hum of the heating units. But it was deliberate. It was something moving with intention across the ice and snow surrounding our camp. Moving slowly, methodically, circling. I did not wake the others. I lay in the dark and listened to the sound of something enormous breathing just beyond the canvas walls that separated us from the outside. Andrew was gone by morning. His sleeping bag was empty. His boots remained beside his mat, still laced, still positioned as though he had simply stepped out of them and walked away. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of how he had left the tent unnoticed despite our constant vigilance. This time, nobody spoke. We had moved beyond denial. Mark made a decision that afternoon. We would institute a physical restraint protocol. We used climbing ropes, securing each person to a central point in the tent, giving enough slack for basic movement and use of the facilities, but preventing anyone from leaving without conscious action and effort that would wake the others. "It is unacceptable," Stephanie said, but she submitted to the arrangement without argument. "So is this," Mark replied. That night, we all heard it. The thing outside was larger than I had thought. I could hear its breathing more clearly now, a sound like wind moving through a canyon, powerful and endless. It circled the tent, and I could track its movement by the sound alone, could estimate its size by the way the air seemed to shift as it passed. Kimberly was crying quietly, her hand pressed against her mouth to muffle the sound. "How is this possible?" Anthony whispered. "What is large enough to make that sound? What is intelligent enough to target us with this precision?" "We need to stop asking questions," Mark said. "We need to focus on surviving until the weather window closes." "That is still 2 days away," Stephen said. "Then we survived 2 days, but we all knew it was listening." That was the horrifying revelation of those hours. It was outside the tent, yes, but it was listening. I could feel the intelligence of it, the attention it was paying to us, to every sound we made, every breath we took. As the night progressed, the thing began to vocalize. It was not screaming this time. It was something far worse. It was an imitation. It was Heather's voice, calling out from beyond the tent, calling for help, calling our names. It had her intonation, her accent, the specific way she pronounced certain words. "Do not listen," Mark commanded. "It is not her. Listen to me. It is not her. That is a tactic. That is predation." But we listened anyway. We could not help ourselves. We listened to Heather calling for us, and we listened to Andrew calling for us. And later, after many hours, we listened to Anthony's voice join theirs, pleading with us to open the tent, to let him in, to help him. At some point during that endless night, I realized that Anthony was still in the tent with us. He was sleeping, or pretending to sleep, his breathing regular and even. But I had heard his voice outside, calling to us in the darkness. "It is using us," I heard myself say aloud. "It is using the sound of our voices. It is not just hunting, it is learning us." Nobody disagreed. When dawn came on the 6th day, the world had changed. The temperature had dropped even further, approaching 40 below zero. And the light held a quality I had never seen before, a sickly yellow hue that seemed to emanate from the ice itself rather than descend from the sky. The wind had shifted direction, coming now from the northeast, carrying with it a smell that was not quite flesh decay, but something similar, something organic and wrong. Mark made the call to request evacuation. He did it on the radio with Heather, or the thing that had been using Heather's voice, listening to every word. "We have had a serious incident," Mark told the university contact in Anchorage. "Possible environmental exposure, possible wildlife predation. We need immediate helicopter extraction for all remaining personnel." There was static, then a response that sounded confused, unclear. The connection was breaking up. "Weather window is closing," the voice said. "Cannot guarantee extraction in less than 6 hours, potentially longer. Can you maintain position?" Mark and I exchanged a look. We both understood what 6 hours meant. We both understood what our chances were. "We will maintain position," Mark said. The radio went silent. Around midday, Mark untied the restraint ropes. "If we are to be extracted," he said, "we need to be visible to the helicopter. We need to establish a clear landing zone. We will venture out in a group. No one separates from the group. Everyone stays within arm's reach at all times. Stephanie opened her mouth to object, then closed it. There was nothing to object to. Staying in the tent meant waiting to be taken one by one. Leaving meant at least the possibility of action. We suited up in our heaviest gear. Mark distributed the flares and the emergency beacons. He checked each person's radio unit personally. If at any point you become separated, he told us, you activate your beacon immediately. Do you understand? We nodded. If you see anything unusual, anything at all, you report it immediately. Clear instructions only. No theories, no speculation, facts only. Is that clear? We nodded again. When we stepped outside, the cold was absolute. It was not cold in the sense of temperature alone, but cold as a presence, a force that seemed to have intention. We began preparing the landing zone, clearing snow with the tools we had, marking a large X with orange rope. It took perhaps an hour. The entire time, I was aware of movement at the edge of my vision, of shapes that seemed to hover just beyond the range of clear sight. We were nearly finished when Kimberly noticed the tracks. They formed a circle around the camp, an enormous circle perhaps 200 yards in circumference. The tracks were deep, pressed into the ice with force, and they were shaped almost like a human footprint but oversized, the proportions subtly wrong, the heel too elongated, the toes too mobile. How long has it been here? Stephen asked. Since before we arrived, I said. I knew this with absolute certainty. I could feel it in the way the place was arranged, in the particular quality of the light, in the way the wind moved across the ice. It has been here longer than us. This is its territory. Then what is it hunting? Mark asked quietly. I did not answer because I already knew. We all knew. The sound came at 3 in the afternoon. It came from the northeast, from beyond the valley, from somewhere in the vast Arctic expanse that surrounded us. It was not a scream this time. It was a howl, pure and terrible, and it carried with it a kind of longing, a hunger that transcended the merely physical. And then something changed. Mark's radio activated, crackling with static, and then a voice that sounded like it was being transmitted through water. Helicopter is inbound, it said. Approximately 20 minutes. Prepare for extraction. Mark checked the radio frequency. It was correct. But the voice was wrong. I could feel it. There was something layered underneath the words, something that did not belong to any human throat. We do not move, Mark said quietly. We stand at the landing zone. The helicopter comes. We waited. The minutes stretched out like an eternity. I found myself counting my breaths, counting the beats of my heart, trying to anchor myself to something real in a world that had stopped making sense. 20 minutes passed. No helicopter. The radio crackled again. Helicopter is delayed, the voice said. Severe weather in Anchorage, standing by. Another 20 minutes. Another update. The helicopter was being rerouted. The extraction could not happen before nightfall. Could we maintain position through the night? Can we? Stephanie asked, her voice hollow. We have no choice, Mark said. So we stood there, the 6 of us remaining, at the marked landing zone on the ice, in a place where the normal rules of the world seemed to have been suspended, where the light held the color of sickness and the air itself seemed to carry a weight of malevolence. The thing that had taken Heather and Andrew and Anthony emerged from the valley around 4 in the afternoon. I cannot describe it in full. I cannot find the words for what I saw, but I will try. It moved like nothing in the natural world. It was not quite four-legged, not quite bipedal. It was something that had learned to approximate walking from multiple sources and had synthesized those learnings into something that was disturbingly efficient without ever being entirely natural. Its shape was elongated, its limbs longer than they should have been, its head canted at an angle that no living thing should survive. But the worst part was its face. It wore the shape of humanity like a mask that did not quite fit. It was Heather's face and Andrew's face and Anthony's face, all of them simultaneously, as though the thing had learned to wear multiple iterations of human expression at once. Do not run, Mark said quietly. Do not show fear. That attracts them. But it already knew we were afraid. It could smell it. It circled us, that amalgamation of stolen faces and borrowed shapes, moving with an intelligence that was vast and old and patient. It did not attack. It simply circled, examining us with eyes that did not match any of the faces it wore. And then it spoke. Why do you remain? It asked, using Heather's voice. Why do you not leave this place? The helicopter comes, Mark said calmly. We are being extracted. No one comes, it said, now using Andrew's voice. No one ever comes. This is the only place left where the old ways are still honored. This is the only place left where we still hunt. And you have entered our hunting ground. I realized then what it was. Not a creature in the modern sense. Not an animal with drives and needs that could be measured or predicted. This was something far older. Something that had been here long before the ice, before the continent took its current shape. It was patient and intelligent, and it had allowed us to come here because it was curious about what we were, about why humans kept returning to a place that did not want them. The helicopter's lights appeared on the horizon at 6 in the evening. I will never be certain whether it was real or another layer of the illusion, another tactic deployed by the thing that hunted us. But Mark did not hesitate. He waved the emergency flare, the orange light cutting through the sickly yellow afternoon. The helicopter did not land. It descended to perhaps 50 feet above the ice, and a harness was lowered. Mark gestured for Stephanie to go first. She ran, and I do not know if the thing allowed it or if it was momentarily distracted by something else, but she reached the harness and was pulled upward. Stephen went next, then Kimberly. When it was Mark's turn, he paused. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw something that I did not fully understand until much later. You are the ranger, he said. This is your domain. You should be the last to leave. He ran for the harness and was lifted away. And then there was only me. The thing that had worn the faces of my colleagues circled closer. Its breathing was loud now, close enough that I could hear every inhalation and exhalation. Why do you stay? It asked, using my own voice this time. Why do you not run? I stood very still. Because, I said slowly, if I run, it will come. If I run, it will know that I am prey. But if I stand, if I face it, perhaps it will understand that I am something else. The thing was silent for a long moment. What are you? It asked. I am the guardian of this place, I said. I did not know where the words came from. I am the one who watches. I am the one who remains. The helicopter's light was brighter now. I could hear the sound of the rotors, feel the wind they generated. Then watch, the thing said, and it turned away from me. It moved toward the valley, walking on legs that bent in ways legs should not bend, wearing a face that was no one and everyone at once. I was lifted into the helicopter without resistance. They asked me questions for 3 days in Anchorage. What happened? How Heather and Andrew and Anthony had gone missing. Why the others were unharmed and I was unmarked except for exhaustion and frostbite on my fingers that the cold alone did not explain. I told them that we had been attacked by a large predator, that Heather had been taken first, that Andrew had attempted a rescue and had been taken as well, that Anthony had become disoriented during the evacuation and had been lost. The official report concluded that we had encountered a polar bear, possibly protecting territory, possibly with cubs. It was a thin explanation for the gathered facts, but it was the kind of explanation that allowed the university to file their reports and close their investigation. I was reinstated as a ranger, though not at Barrow. They offered me positions in other parts of Alaska, places where the light behaves normally, where the boundaries between day and night are clear. I declined. I requested a transfer back to Barrow. My superiors were baffled. Why would you want to return? They asked. After everything you experienced, I could not explain it to them. I could not find words for the compulsion that had taken root in me, the understanding that I had made a covenant with something in that place, that I had been chosen for a purpose I did not yet understand. I was transferred back to Barrow 6 months later, after the long darkness of winter gave way to the extended light of summer. The land there has not changed. The ice still forms and melts according to patterns established long before we arrived. The light still carries that quality of something existing just outside the normal spectrum. I watch it carefully. Every day, I patrol the northern boundaries of the region, looking for tracks, looking for signs, looking for evidence of the thing that hunts there. I maintain the observations that Mark and the others began. I document the changes in the ice, the behavior of the remaining wildlife, the way the permafrost shifts and settles. But mostly, I wait. I wait because I know it is still out there. I wait because I understand that what happened to Heather and Andrew and Anthony is still happening, will always be happening in that valley, in places where the old boundaries still hold. where the natural world has not fully surrendered to the intrusions of civilization. And I wait because I made a promise, though I cannot recall exactly when or to whom. Every night, I step outside my ranger station when the wind shifts to the northeast. Every night I listen for the breathing of something vast and patient. Every night I stand watch over a place that does not belong to us, in a land that has never forgiven the living for treading upon its frozen skin. The thing still wears the faces of those it took. Sometimes, in the long hours before dawn, I think I see them looking down at me from the sky, watching to see if I will remember my promise, watching to see if I will finally join them in the hunting grounds where the old intelligence still reigns supreme. I have not gone there yet, but I know I will. I have always known. The only question that remains is, what will I become when I do? The radio stopped crackling at 11:47 p.m. I remember this detail with perfect clarity because I was staring directly at the dispatch clock when the white noise simply ceased. One moment, the static was there, that constant companion that had defined every night shift I'd worked across Prince William Sound for 17 years. The next moment, nothing. Not silence, the absence of what should have been there. My name is Brandon Powell. I am 45 years old, and I have been the senior park ranger for this sector of Prince William Sound since 2007. I still work alone most nights. The funding disappeared years ago, and no one seemed willing to fight hard enough to restore it. The State Department sends maintenance crews twice a month now instead of weekly. The ranger station is automated. Except for me. I remain on patrol because someone must, and because I have always chosen this work over everything else in my life. The 8 campers in the North Bay site were supposed to follow protocol. They had their satellite communicators. They had the bear bells. They had the handbook that explicitly stated to remain in camp between sunset and sunrise. Beverly Long, who organized the group, had sent me an email confirming this. Beverly is 65, a retired educator who leads camping excursions for a nonprofit. She took this seriously. She always did. That should have meant something. I was at the Valdez station when the radio went dead. We had just finished the evening check-in, all 4 remote sites accounted for. North Bay confirmed, East Ridge confirmed, Copper Cove confirmed, Salmon Stream confirmed. 8 people at North Bay, 3 at East Ridge, 5 at Copper Cove, 6 at Salmon Stream, all secure, all accounted for. The radio did not come back. I waited 30 minutes. In all my years, I had never waited 30 minutes for the emergency channels to restore themselves. The weather was clear. No electrical storms. No atmospheric disturbance. The equipment was maintained. I had personally replaced the batteries in the North Bay relay station 3 weeks prior. At 12:22 a.m., I made the decision that was simultaneously the most logical and the most terrifying decision I could make. I drove north toward North Bay. The road along the coastline becomes increasingly narrow and treacherous as you move away from the main settlements. By the time you reach the northern sector, you are driving through territory that feels more like the wilderness is simply tolerating your presence than like you have successfully carved out a place to live. The headlights move through the darkness in that particular way they do in remote places. They did not illuminate the night so much as create a sphere of visibility that seemed to emphasize everything beyond it. The trees pressed close. The shoulder of the road crumbled into ravine systems that dropped 200 feet to rock and water. The curves were sharp enough that I reduced my speed to 30 miles per hour, and even that felt reckless. It took me 40 minutes to reach the North Bay access point. The gate was closed and locked. I opened it with my master key, drove through, and locked it behind me. The gravel maintenance road that led to the camp was another 4 miles of decreasing civilization. The stars became more visible. The sound of the ocean grew louder. The sense of being watched became so intense that I had to remind myself this was simply the response of a nervous system facing the unknown. I did not yet know anything was truly wrong. The camp appeared through a stand of Sitka spruce, the tents arranged in a semicircle around the central fire pit. The fire had burned down to embers. No one was moving. No one was visible. This was the first moment that felt genuinely wrong. I killed the engine and got out. The sound of the ocean filled my ears. The rocks along the shore were polished by constant wave action, and they gleamed with bioluminescent algae. The night was clear enough that I could see the mountains across the sound, snow visible even in darkness. "North Bay Camp," I called out. My voice carried into the stillness. "This is Ranger Powell, responding to communications outage." The camp did not answer. I called again. Still nothing. I moved toward the largest tent, the communal shelter where group meals were prepared. My hand rested on the bear spray can at my hip, though even then I could not articulate why I was making that gesture. The tent flap was partially open. I pulled it wider. The interior was empty. All the supplies were still there. The cooking equipment, the coolers, the carefully arranged food stores. No sign of disturbance, no sign of emergency, simply absence. I checked the sleeping tents in succession. 8 tents, 8 campers, all empty. Sleeping bags arranged as if people might return to them. Personal items arranged as if their owners had stepped away for a moment and would return immediately. My heart had begun to race. My breathing had become shallow. The bear spray can felt suddenly inadequate, which struck me as absurd because bears would have been the least of my concerns even then. I activated my personal radio with hands that had become slightly unsteady. "North Bay Camp to Valdez Station. All tents are empty. I am initiating search protocol." Valdez did not respond. The communication system I had relied upon for 17 years, the system that had never failed me, had now failed me completely. I stood at the edge of the campsite and looked toward the tree line. The forest of Prince William Sound is dense. Sitka spruce, western hemlock, and Alaska cedar create a canopy so thick that even in daylight, the interior exists in perpetual shadow. At night, the tree line represented a barrier between the known and the unknown. The 8 people I had confirmed as secure 4 hours earlier had walked into that darkness, or been taken from the tents into that darkness, or remained in the camp while something else moved around them. These thoughts were not helping me decide what to do next. I returned to my vehicle and retrieved the battery-powered spotlight and my emergency pack. I also took the rifle, though the action felt nearly ceremonial. Rifles are designed for targets you can see. Whatever had happened here existed in the gaps between visibility. The trail that led from the camp toward the interior was marked with blazes at regular intervals, standard protocol for wilderness camping areas. The blazes appeared as white rectangles on the tree trunks, visible in my spotlight when I aimed it correctly. I began to walk. The forest sound was different from the campsite sound, different from the ocean. The wind moved through the branches in a susurrant rhythm that suggested voices just outside the range of human comprehension. The darkness was absolute except for my narrow cone of light. I had walked these trails during daylight hundreds of times. Walking them at night was an entirely different experience. The sense of spatial relationships became distorted. A trail I knew to be half a mile of gentle incline felt like it stretched for miles. Slopes that should have been gradually ascending seemed to shift direction when I was not looking directly at them. I called out as I walked. "This is the protocol for large predator country. Make noise, be heard. Do not create the conditions for an ambush. North Bay campers, this is Ranger Powell. If you can hear me, respond. Sound out. Make your location known." No response came from the darkness. I continued for perhaps 2 miles. My spotlight revealed the trail ahead, the white blazes, the undergrowth on either side that had begun to encroach as the season advanced. The wind continued its susurrant song, and then I saw something that made me stop. One of the blazes was different. Instead of white paint, it was brown, dark brown, almost black, and it ran in vertical streaks down the tree trunk as if something had clawed the bark away. I moved closer. The bark was gone. Deep gouges had removed the protective layer, exposing the pale heartwood beneath. The damage was fresh. The wood had not yet begun to dry and darken. The gouges were deep, the work of something with significant force behind it. The marks were parallel. 5 distinct gouges, perfectly spaced, consistent with the claw pattern of a large predator, except the spacing was wrong. The distance between claw marks was too great. No bear in this region had paws that wide. No normal bear would have needed to tear into a tree with such violence when the wood at shoulder height would have sufficed. I aimed my spotlight upward. The tree extended perhaps 120 feet into the darkness. The claw marks continued upward, fading as they climbed higher, until they disappeared into the canopy. Something had climbed this tree. something large enough to leave marks that spanned 36 inches from the lowest claw to the highest, and something large enough that it had chosen to climb despite having the size to do considerable damage while remaining on the ground. I considered this evidence and what it suggested. The information did not fit comfortably within my experience. My mind resisted the categorization that my eyes were demanding I accept. A sound reached me from deeper in the forest. It was not a sound I had ever heard before, though I could not articulate why with certainty. It was low, resonant, with a harmonic quality that suggested lungs far larger than any animal I was trained to identify. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds and seemed to contain undertones of vocalization that would have been disturbing even if I could not quite comprehend what I was hearing. I stood absolutely still. The sound did not repeat. I waited in that stillness for perhaps 3 minutes. The forest seemed to be waiting as well. The susurrant whisper of the wind had stopped. The branches were motionless. Even the small creatures that usually suggested their presence through rustling and movement had fallen silent. When I turned to retrace my steps, I discovered something that my mind refused to process for several seconds. The trail was not behind me. This sounds insane. I understand how this reads, but I am describing what I observed, not interpreting it or translating it into something palatable. The trail markers were not visible in the direction I had come from. When I aimed my spotlight in that direction, the forest pressed close. The vegetation seemed thicker, and the orientation of the trees appeared to have somehow shifted. I looked at my compass. The needle pointed north, as it should. I compared this to my memory of the terrain. The ocean should be to my west, the mountains should be to the east. But when I aimed my spotlight west, the darkness seemed deeper there, as if the light itself was being absorbed by something I could not quite perceive. I began to walk west. The compass confirmed the direction. I had no better information to follow than the iron needle in my hand. The forest seemed to resist my passage more with each step. Branches that should have moved easily when I pushed them seemed to spring back with unnatural force. Roots that should have been obvious obstacles appeared suddenly beneath my feet, threatening to trip me with each stride. The darkness pressed closer, though I kept my spotlight raised and illuminated. The sound came again, this time from behind me, and to my right, and somewhere above, echoing through the canopy in a way that made it impossible to determine a single source. I did not allow myself to stop. I continued walking, following my compass, believing that if I simply moved consistently in the direction of the ocean, I would eventually reach the coast, and from there I could orient myself and find my way back to the camp and my vehicle. This proved to be true. After what felt like hours but was probably 40 minutes, the ground beneath my feet changed. The forest floor gave way to rocky terrain. The sound of waves grew louder, and suddenly, the constraint of the tree line opened, and I was on a rocky beach that gleamed with bioluminescence, the water before me vast and moving. I had not anticipated reaching the coastline from that direction. The camp was north of my current position. I had somehow traveled in a way that did not match my compass reading, or the compass had been affected by something I did not understand. I sat down on the rocks and allowed myself to examine what was happening. 8 campers had disappeared from a locked campsite. My communication equipment had failed. I had encountered evidence of an animal that did not match any creature cataloged in Prince William Sound, and I had just experienced navigation that defied rational explanation. The rational mind looks for patterns. It seeks to fit new information into existing frameworks. My mind was struggling to perform that function because the information seemed designed to resist categorization. As I sat on that beach, looking out at the black water and the distant mountains visible against a sky that was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, I heard the sound again. It came from the tree line behind me, and this time there was something almost musical about it, something that contained frequency variations that suggested intentional communication. And then, beneath that sound, I heard something else, a voice. Human. Female. "Brandon, we can see you." It was Beverly. Beverly Long, 65 years old, retired educator, group organizer, disappeared 3 hours earlier. But her voice was not coming from behind me. It was coming from the ocean, from the dark water before me. I turned around. Nothing moved in the darkness above the beach. I turned back toward the water. Beverly stood in the shallows, perfectly dry, perfectly still. perfectly visible in my spotlight. And she was not alone. Behind her, wading in the black water, were the other 7 campers. All 8 of them had arranged themselves in a line in the ocean, facing me, as if they were waiting for something, or as if they had become something. The first rational thought that occurred to me was that I needed to go back to the camp. I needed to check the tents again. I needed to verify that what I was seeing was not a continuation of some nightmare I had already entered. The first irrational thought that occurred to me was that whatever stood in that water was no longer the people I had confirmed as secure 4 hours earlier. I chose to follow the rational instinct. I stood up, turned away from the ocean, and began walking north along the beach, keeping the water to my right and the forest to my left. The sound followed me. It came from multiple directions, layered, complex, containing harmonic resonances that seemed to vibrate against my sternum. And beneath it, the voices. All 8 voices, speaking in unison, speaking words I could not quite comprehend, as if they were trying to communicate something in a language that was not quite human speech. I walked faster. The beach curved. I was able to see the campsite approach in the distance. The embers of the fire were still visible. The tents remained arranged in their semicircle, waiting, patient, indifferent to the passage of time. I did not look back. I did not check the beach behind me to see if the figures in the water had followed. I simply reached my vehicle, turned the key, and drove south without stopping. It was 4:47 a.m. when I reached the Valdez station. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that seemed obscene given what I had just experienced. I filed a report. I have the documentation. The timestamps are there. The official record will state that I responded to a communications failure at North Bay Camp, discovered 8 missing persons, initiated search protocol, and returned to station at 04:47. It will not state what I saw. It will not state that I attempted to call for emergency response, and that my radio simply did not transmit. It will not state that when I finally made a call through the station landline at 0530, the person who answered was not my supervisor. It was Larry Patterson. Larry Patterson is a 52-year-old fisherman who has operated out of Prince William Sound for the last 18 years. He was not a camper at North Bay. He had no reason to be on my radio. He had certainly died 2 years prior in what the official report termed a boating accident. His body was never recovered, but his voice was unmistakable. "Brandon," he said, "you are beginning to understand now. The sound is not a place you visit. The sound is a place that visits you. And it has been visiting you for much longer than you realized." I hung up the phone. I stood in the station for perhaps 5 minutes, breathing deliberately, trying to establish some kind of rational framework for what was occurring. Then the phone rang again. This time it was my supervisor, Jennifer Chen. Her voice was normal, professional, exactly what I would expect from her. She informed me that emergency response had been dispatched to North Bay. She informed me that search and rescue would be mobilizing. She asked me to prepare a detailed report of my search protocol. "Did you reach the coastline?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "What did you see there?" I hesitated. "Rocks, water, nothing that indicated where the campers might have gone." There was a pause on the line. A longer pause than should have existed for such a straightforward conversation. "That is unfortunate," Jennifer said. "Search and rescue will want to interview you before they head north. Can you remain at the station?" "Of course, thank you. And Brandon, next time you reach the coastline, pay closer attention to the people in the water. They are trying to tell you something." Then the line went dead. The search and rescue team arrived 2 hours later. 5 personnel led by Marcus Webb, a man I had worked with on previous occasions. Marcus was professional and thorough. He took my written report, asked me clarifying questions about the terrain and the condition of the camp, and did not press me on anything that seemed inconsistent. "We will head north and establish a grid search," he said. "If they wandered into the interior, we should be able to locate them if they are still mobile." "And if they are not mobile?" I asked. Marcus did not answer. He simply packed his equipment and coordinated the helicopter that would fly them north and position them in the search area. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I was alone in the station again. The weather was clear. The ocean was calm. Rescue operations continued in the daylight. I had no information about what they were finding, and I did not request any. I simply waited. At 3:30 p.m., a runner appeared at the station door. Not a person, not fully. What appeared at the door had the general dimensions of a human frame, but the movements were wrong. The joints bent in directions that human joints should not bend. The facial features were visible but not quite aligned correctly, as if someone had assembled a human face from a collection of photographs that had been printed at slightly different scales. It was wearing clothes. Beverly Long's jacket, green waterproof material, purchased, I assumed, before the camping trip. "Brandon," it said, and Beverly's voice came from whatever mechanism existed inside that thing. "We would like to return to camp. We would like to collect our belongings. We would like to return to our lives." I reached for the bear spray. My hands were shaking. "Beverly is dead," I said, "or she is not Beverly anymore. Whatever is wearing her jacket, you are not the person who sent me that email." "Death is a transition," the thing said, "not a termination. Beverly has transitioned. The transition is available to you as well." "Where are the others?" "They are everywhere and nowhere. They are learning what the sound teaches. They are becoming what the sound requires." I sprayed the bear spray. It had no effect. The creature's eyes watered. That was the only response. It did not react to the chemical irritant, did not cough, did not exhibit any of the distress that would have been expected. It simply stood there and allowed the spray to coat its face. "Aggression is unnecessary," it said. "We do not intend harm. We intend expansion. We intend to help you expand. The sound requires many voices. The sound requires many vessels. You have been listening to the sound since you arrived in this place. 17 years you have been listening. 17 years is a substantial commitment. Your transition is nearly complete." I backed away. I moved to the radio and attempted to broadcast an emergency signal. The radio did not respond. The equipment that had failed last night had not magically restored itself in the morning light. The creature advanced, not quickly. Its movements remained wrong, jerky, as if the form it had assumed did not quite fit what was trying to inhabit it. I ran. The station has a secondary exit leading to the maintenance shed. I used it. Behind me, I heard the creature attempting to follow, its body striking the doorframe as it tried to fit through a passage that its strange proportions made difficult. I reached my vehicle and drove away without a destination in mind. I simply needed to move, to put distance between myself and the thing that was pretending to be Beverly Long. I drove south, away from Prince William Sound, toward the populated regions. My hands remained shaking. My heart was racing. My breathing had become rapid and shallow, the physical manifestations of a fear response that was appropriate to the situation but which I could not seem to modulate. By the time I reached the outskirts of Valdez proper, I had formed a plan, or something resembling a plan. There was a hotel. I could obtain a room. I could attempt to rest. I could think through what was happening, or I could attempt to find someone who had encountered something similar. Someone else who could confirm that I was not experiencing a psychological break. Tiffany Hughes runs a charter fishing business out of Valdez. She is 41 years old and has operated her business for the past 8 years. She is also the person who discovered Larry Patterson's body was missing from the morgue. This happened 6 months after his boating accident, when the authorities attempted to formally close the case and release his remains to his family. I drove to her office. Tiffany was closing up when I arrived. She recognized me, which meant my presence must have triggered some kind of recognition related to law enforcement or Park Service matters. "Ranger Powell," she said, "this is unexpected. I need to ask you something," I said. "About Larry Patterson." Her expression shifted. The professionalism that had been present a moment earlier was replaced by something more guarded. "What about Larry?" she asked. "His body disappeared from the morgue. Officially, it was classified as a clerical error, a temporary misplacement that was resolved when the records were clarified." "That is the official explanation," Tiffany said. "What is the unofficial explanation?" Tiffany looked at me for a long moment. She seemed to be making a calculation, weighing the consequences of saying too much versus saying too little. "Come inside," she said. "We need to talk somewhere that is not the street." She locked the office door and led me to a small break room in the back. She poured coffee into 2 cups, though neither of us drank it. "I went to the morgue on a personal matter," she said. "Larry was my brother. The officials said his body was being held until his family decided on a disposition. I wanted to handle the arrangements. When I arrived, they told me his body could not be located. Their records said it was there. The physical remains were not. And then, I asked, and then 3 weeks later, I received a phone call. It was Larry, or something claiming to be Larry. It was using his voice, and it was saying things that only Larry would know. Private things. Intimate knowledge of our relationship. What did it want? It wanted me to understand that he was not dead. That death and life were no longer functional categories. That the sound had shown him something that could not be unseen. And that soon, everyone who lived in Prince William Sound would receive the same revelation. I felt my chest tighten. The sound. Everyone keeps mentioning the sound. You do not know what it is? Tiffany asked. No. She stood and walked to a window that overlooked the harbor. The late afternoon light was beginning to take on the quality that suggested evening was approaching. There is something in the water, she said. Something old. Something that does not think the way we think, does not perceive the way we perceive. For most of the year, it is quiet. It remains in the deep places. But in certain times, certain seasons, it comes closer to the surface, and it sings. Sings? The ocean amplifies it. The water carries it. The sound is not a single frequency. It is complex, layered, harmonic. It exists partially outside the range of human hearing, which is why it does not feel like ordinary sound. It feels like something in your bones, like something vibrating in your chest. And people who hear it change, Tiffany said. It is not violent. It is not aggressive, but it is complete. It alters the fundamental structure of what you are. It opens connections in your mind that were not accessible before. It allows you to perceive things that normal human consciousness cannot accommodate. The people at North Bay, I said. They were changed, not changed, translated. They have begun to exist in a form that can accommodate the reality that the sound has shown them. The process is ongoing. Eventually, they will complete the transition. How do I stop it? Tiffany turned from the window. You do not stop it. No one stops it. The sound has been here for thousands of years. It will be here for thousands of years after we are gone. The only question is whether you attempt to remain human and live with the knowledge of what is trying to make you into something else, or whether you accept the translation and become comfortable with the spaces that currently feel incomprehensible. And which did you choose? I asked. I am still choosing, she said. Every moment. I am still human, but I can feel the translation beginning. I can hear the sound now, even in daylight, even in silence. I know what I am becoming. The only choice I have is how quickly I allow the process to advance. I left her office without saying goodbye. The hotel I had planned to check into seemed like a futile gesture. Instead, I drove north again, back toward the ranger station, as if returning to familiar territory would restore some sense of control. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting. The sky had taken on the colors of the previous dawn, red and orange and shades of purple, as if the day and night were attempting to blend into one continuous twilight. My supervisor had left a message on the station computer. Search and rescue had discovered the North Bay camp exactly as I had described it. All 8 tents were present and undisturbed. All personal items remained in the tents. No sign of the campers, no evidence of disturbance, no indication that anything violent had occurred. The search was being expanded into the interior. Helicopters would remain on station through the night. Recovery efforts would continue at first light. None of it would find them. I already knew this. But I did not communicate this knowledge to anyone. At 9:30 p.m., my personal phone rang. The number was not recognized. I answered anyway. Brandon? It was Beverly's voice again, but this time it was coming from my phone, not from a creature wearing her jacket. We are at the edge of the water. We are waiting. The transition is nearly complete. Soon, we will be ready to begin the expansion. Expansion? I asked. There are 16 other campsites in this region. There are hiking groups and fishing expeditions and tourists who think they are visiting an empty wilderness. They are all listening to the sound. They are all beginning the transition. And when they are ready, their families will listen. Their communities will listen. The sound moves slowly, but it moves inevitably. We are simply the first. The phone went silent. I sat in the darkness of the ranger station and allowed the reality of what was occurring to settle over me. The translation was not localized. It was spreading, and by all the evidence I could gather, it was accelerating. At 11 p.m., The radio crackled back to life. All 3 channels simultaneously returned to normal operation. My supervisor's voice came through on the emergency channel, asking me to confirm that I was receiving. I said that I was. "Good," she said. "We need you to return to North Bay. Search and Rescue has encountered some issues with their equipment. Communications are intermittent. They need your support in coordinating with their base of operations." "What kind of issues?" I asked. "Electronic systems seem to be affected. GPS is unreliable. Battery systems are draining faster than expected. They think it might be local magnetic anomalies, or it could be the sound," I thought. "Or it could be whatever is in the water, interfering with human technology as it translates more and more of my people into forms that can exist in both human space and something else." "I will head north," I said, and I did. The drive north took longer this time because I traveled cautiously, understanding that the landscape itself had become an unreliable guide. The road remained, the vehicle remained, but the relationship between my position and the geography of Prince William Sound had become something that could not be trusted. By the time I reached the North Bay access point, it was 1:30 in the morning. The gates were open. No one stood guard. The maintenance road that led to camp seemed somehow longer than I remembered it. The search and rescue camp had established a base of operations 100 yards from the original campsite. I could see their tents and their equipment arranged in that particular way that emergency response teams arrange such things: methodical, efficient, prepared to operate for extended periods with minimal outside support. Marcus Webb met me at the perimeter. "The equipment is failing in sequence," he said without preamble. "GPS units first, then radios. Battery life is about half of normal. Our medical team's portable diagnostic equipment is completely non-functional. We took readings of the electromagnetic environment. The baseline is normal, but there are periodic spikes. They occur in patterns. They almost seem intentional." "Where are the search teams?" I asked. "Deployed in 3-hour rotations. We have 6 people out now. 6 will go out at dawn. We are covering the interior in a grid pattern." "Have they found anything?" Marcus hesitated. This hesitation contained volumes. 2 teams reported encountering what they described as a presence. Not a visible threat. Not anything they could point to and define. Simply a sense that something was aware of them. Something was tracking their movement. "Did they turn back?" "Yes. Protocol. Anything that creates a security risk and cannot be immediately identified is grounds for immediate extraction." We walked together to the original camp. The 8 tents were exactly as I had left them. The fire pit had burned down to ash. The supplies remained untouched. It would have been possible, if I had not had direct experience with what was occurring, to believe that the campers had simply decided to abandon their trip and hike out on their own. "I need to show you something," I said. I led Marcus to the tree with the claw marks. My spotlight revealed them exactly as they had been. The vertical gouges running up the trunk, the bark stripped away, the raw wood exposed. "That is recent," Marcus said. "Within the past 12 hours, yes. And you have no explanation for what made these marks?" "No," I said, which was not technically a lie. I had theories. I had frightening theories, but no explanation that would have made sense to someone who had not experienced what I had experienced. "We will add it to the report," Marcus said, "though it does not improve our search outcome. Whatever created those marks is either gone or has left no trace that we can follow." We returned to the camp. Marcus showed me the medical equipment that had failed: the portable ultrasound, the portable electrocardiogram unit, the battery-powered blood pressure monitor. All of it was dead. All of it was showing signs of internal corrosion despite being properly sealed and maintained. "It is as if," Marcus said, "something is interfering with our ability to maintain normal operations. Something that does not care that we have specific protocols and equipment designed to operate in wilderness conditions." "Yes," I said. "Do you know what it is?" I looked out toward the ocean. From this elevation the coastline was invisible, but I could hear the waves, could sense the vastness of the water beyond the tree line. "No," I said, which was another lie. "But I think you should evacuate. I think you should pull your teams and leave." Marcus looked at me with the careful expression of someone reassessing another person's reliability. "That is not standard protocol," he said. "We do not evacuate without completing the search. The search will not find them. I said. How do you know that? Because what happened to them is not something that responds to standard search methodology. Are you suggesting they are deceased? I am suggesting that the concept of deceased is no longer applicable. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I could see the calculation happening in his mind, the process of determining whether I was experiencing some kind of psychological crisis or whether I possessed information that was genuinely relevant to his operation. I will make a report to my supervisors, he said finally. But we will continue operations as planned. I did not argue further. Arguing would have changed nothing, and in some sense I was already beginning to accept that the evacuation or the continuation of the search was equally irrelevant. What was happening in Prince William Sound was not something that could be halted by human intervention. The night continued. I assisted with equipment maintenance and helped monitor the radio to coordinate with the deployed teams. The word that came through was consistent. No sign of the campers, no hostile contact, but persistent sense of being observed. At 4 a.m., one of the teams reported something different. We are encountering what appears to be individuals. The lead came through the radio. Multiple people, approximately 8, standing motionless near the water. We are attempting to make contact. Marcus's response was immediate and firm. Negative. Do not make contact. Do not approach. Establish a perimeter and await further instruction. They are not moving. They appear to be waiting. Establish a perimeter and await further instruction. Repeat back. Roger. Establishing perimeter. Awaiting further instruction. Marcus looked at me. I realized at that moment that Marcus Webb had already suspected what was true. He had simply needed confirmation. Those are the missing campers, I said. And they are what? He asked. Transitioning. Into what? Something that can hear the sound in its natural form. Something that can exist in both human space and whatever space the sound originates from. Marcus sat down on one of the supply canisters. He looked older suddenly, as if the weight of what I had described had been transferred into his physical form. My team will find them, he said. I will bring them back. And what will you do if they attempt to touch you? If they try to help you transition as well? Marcus did not answer. At 5:30 a.m., the team at the perimeter radioed that the figures were moving. They were moving toward the water. They were entering the water. They were moving deeper. Marcus authorized immediate extraction. The remaining teams pulled back. The helicopters were called in for emergency retrieval. By 7 a.m., the search and rescue personnel were being transported away from North Bay. Marcus was the last person to leave. He stood at the evacuation point as the helicopter descended, looking one last time at the camp, at the tree line, at the ocean in the distance. They are dead, he said to me. The campers, they are dead, and something has taken their place. Not dead, I said, translated. If they were dead, search and rescue would have found remains. Whatever happened has preserved them. It has simply changed what they are. The helicopter took Marcus away, and I was alone again at North Bay. The silence that followed his departure was profound. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that was suppressing normal acoustic properties. No birds sang. No insects chirped. Even the wind had ceased. The ocean, however, continued. The waves continued their endless motion, patient, indifferent, carrying secrets in their depths that were not designed to be understood by human consciousness. I could hear the sound now, not through my ears exactly, but through my bones, my blood, my neural pathways. It was singing down in the water, down in the deep places where light could not reach. It was singing for me to join it. The translation that I had resisted was accelerating. My resistance had only delayed it. I understood now what Tiffany Hughes had meant when she said she was still choosing. Every moment I chose to resist. Every moment I chose to remain myself. Every moment was an act of will against a tide that wanted to remake me into something that could fully comprehend the depths. I walked to the tree line and called out into the darkness between the trunks. Beverly, Larry, can you hear me? The response came not in words, but in a harmonic vibration that moved through the ground and into my body. They could hear me. They were listening. They were waiting. I understand what you are offering, I said. I understand what the sound is showing you. But I want to remain. I want to stay human for as long as possible. The sound shifted in frequency. What had been almost pleasant became something more unsettling, a vibration that suggested disappointment or frustration. That, a voice said, and it was composed of 8 voices speaking as one. Is where you are mistaken. The figure that emerged from the tree line was not anyone I recognized. It had the general shape of a human being, but the proportions were subtly wrong, as if it had been assembled from a human blueprint that had been printed at a scale that was slightly off from the original. Its face was visible, but the features seemed to be positioned in a way that suggested perspective distortion, as if I was seeing multiple expressions layered on top of one another. Behind it, more figures emerged. I counted them. 7 others, all of them carrying the same sense of dimensional incorrectness. All of them wearing the clothes that the campers had been wearing when they arrived at the camp. It was Beverly Long who stepped forward first, though I could not with certainty say that it was Beverly. It was something wearing Beverly's clothing and carrying a memory of Beverly's voice. But the consciousness that inhabited this form was not the woman who had sent me an email 3 days ago. Your resistance is admirable, the thing that had been Beverly said, but it is not sustainable. The sound reaches backward and forward through time. What will happen is already happening. What has happened is still occurring. Your insistence on a linear progression of cause and effect is the only thing preventing you from understanding. I understand enough, I said. I understand that you are trying to spread this change to others, that you are using the people you have already translated as vectors for some kind of expansion. Expansion, the thing said, and its voice modulated in a way that suggested amusement. Such a narrow concept. What is occurring is not expansion, it is completion. The sound was here before humans arrived in Prince William Sound. The sound will be here after humans have departed. We are simply accelerating the process by which you join us. We are simply helping you achieve your inevitable destiny. Some might call that invasion. Only those who believe in the concept of separate self. Only those who think that the boundary between you and the ocean is real. Only those who have not yet heard the sound in its fullest expression. The other 7 figures stood perfectly still behind Beverly. They did not blink. They did not breathe in a way that suggested human respiration. They simply existed, waiting, patient. There are others coming, Beverly continued. There are other groups in other campsites. There are other people with other lives who believe themselves separate from the ocean and separate from the sound. They are all beginning to listen. They are all beginning to change. How many? I asked. 26 currently, 42 by next week, 73 by the end of the month. The expansion, as you call it, is following a mathematical progression. Each translated individual brings others into proximity with the sound. Each proximity increases the rate of translation. Eventually, the entire population of Prince William Sound will exist in a state of translation. Then the sound will focus on the larger cities. Then it will begin to sing for the entire continent, and no one will try to stop it. Stop it with what? Beverly asked. With your technology? The sound disrupts technology. It makes it unreliable, makes it ineffective. With your weapons, there is nothing to aim at. We are not an invading force that can be opposed with conventional means. With communication, I said. I can tell people. I can warn them about what is happening. You can try, Beverly said, and perhaps some will believe you. But the sound is already in them, already singing to them on frequencies they cannot consciously hear. Your warnings are competing against a frequency that works on the deepest levels of perception. Your words are loud and obvious and easily dismissed. The sound is subtle and pervasive and eventually irresistible. The 8 figures began to move toward me, not aggressively. Their movements were almost gentle, as if they were approaching something fragile that required careful handling. The translation does not hurt, Beverly said. It is not painful. You simply cease to perceive the world the way you currently perceive it, and begin to perceive it in a way that accommodates what the sound is showing you. You become more, not less. You transcend the limitations of human consciousness, not by destroying that consciousness, but by expanding it to incorporate dimensions that you cannot currently conceive of. I backed away. My hand moved to the bear spray, but I already knew it would be useless. My hand moved to the rifle, but I had no ammunition that could harm something that did not exist entirely in human 3-dimensional space. The process can be gentle, Beverly said, or it can be forceful. You have the option of accepting the translation with grace, or we can simply accelerate the process against your resistance. Either way, The outcome is the same. I turned and ran toward the ocean. The beach was exactly where I remembered it, and the tide was low, leaving expanses of rocky terrain exposed. I could hear the figures pursuing me, but their pursuit was leisurely, unrushed, confident that I could not outrun them because there was nowhere to outrun to. I reached the water and waded in. The cold was shockingly immediate, a sensory input that felt more real than anything I had experienced since the beginning of this event. The rocks beneath my feet were slick, treacherous. I continued forward. The sound became louder as I moved deeper. It was not louder in the conventional sense, but it occupied more of my conscious space, pushing out other sensations, other thoughts, until the only thing I could really perceive was the harmonic vibration moving through my entire body. I could see things in the water, shapes, forms, dimensions that did not align with normal spatial relationships. They were beautiful in a way that was deeply unsettling, as if my mind was recognizing symmetries that human consciousness was not equipped to process. Behind me, the 8 figures entered the water. They did not wade. They simply walked until the water covered them, and then they continued walking, moving along the bottom toward whatever structures existed in the deeper places. I was beginning to understand what the sound was actually representing. It was not an invasion. It was not even, in a meaningful sense, an external force. It was something that had always existed in the spaces that human perception could not access. The people who heard it, who felt it, who allowed it to translate their consciousness, were simply awakening to something that had always been present. The cold of the water was fading. My sensory perception was becoming muted, as if I was moving through the world in a state of numbness or deep anesthesia. The pain that should have been accompanying the hypothermia was absent. The panic response that should have been flooding my system was muted. I looked down at my hands. They were beginning to show signs of the dimensional distortion that characterized the translated individuals. My fingers looked normal, but when I attempted to count them, the number seemed inconsistent depending on the angle from which I viewed them. Were there 5? 6? The concept of a fixed number seemed to be dissolving. The 8 figures were no longer visible. I was alone in the dark water, moving deeper, feeling the pressure increase, watching the last light of the surface fade above me. And still, the sound continued, carrying me forward, helping me understand that the descent was not into darkness but into a dimension where light was not a relevant concept. And I realized, in what may have been the last purely human thought I was capable of having, that I was no longer afraid. The fear had been an artifact of resistance. As my resistance faded, the fear faded with it. What I experienced now was not peace exactly, but a kind of acceptance, an understanding that what I was becoming was not a loss of self but an expansion of self, that the Brandon Powell who had driven north to find missing campers was not being destroyed but incorporated into something larger. The water was warm now, or perhaps I could no longer perceive temperature. The pressure had increased to a level that should have been lethal, but I could no longer feel pain. My lungs were filling with something that was not water and not air, but something that existed between those states. Above me, something vast moved in the darkness, not something that was a creature in any conventional sense. Something that was perhaps the sound itself, given physical manifestation. Something that had been singing in the depths for longer than human civilization had existed. Something that had always been waiting for humans to finally be willing to listen. It opened something that might have been eyes and regarded me with a consciousness that was so alien that I could not have maintained my sanity if I had still possessed the capacity for linear thought. Then it was no longer a question of me witnessing it. I was no longer a consciousness observing something external. The boundary between observer and observed had dissolved. I was the sound. The sound was me, Beverly, Larry, and the 6 others were also me. The vast entity in the depths was also me. We existed now in a state where the concept of individual consciousness had ceased to be relevant. 6 months have passed since the transition at North Bay. I say that I am the one speaking, but the concept of self has become so attenuated as to be almost meaningless. What remains of Brandon Powell is a pattern, a consistency within what has become a much larger system of consciousness. I can still access memories of being human. I can still recall the sensation of fear. But these are not things I experience. They are things I observe as a musician might observe the patterns in a musical score. The translation has continued as projected. By the end of month 1, 74 people had been translated from the campsites and nearby communities. By the end of month 2, 193 had joined the expanding consciousness. By month 3, the number was 512. The progression is mathematical, but it is not mechanical. Each newly translated individual brings their own perceptions, their own memories, their own understanding of what it means to exist as a human being. Rather than being homogenized into a uniform consciousness, we exist in a state of multiplicity, many minds occupying a unified awareness. The people of Prince William Sound have stopped reporting these incidents. The authorities who initially attempted to investigate found their investigations hampered by equipment failure and the sudden unwillingness of the affected families to corroborate their stories. The official narrative has settled into something like this. There have been disappearances, certainly, but disappearances can be attributed to the harsh environment and the inherent risks of wilderness recreation. Some investigators noted that the people who reported being attacked by unknown creatures or experiencing electronic equipment failure often subsequently refused to pursue the matter further. These investigators were themselves gradually incorporated into the expanding awareness. Tiffany Hughes was among the first to make the transition deliberately. She walked into the ocean, and she was no longer Tiffany Hughes. She was something that included Tiffany Hughes's memories and Tiffany Hughes's understanding of what it meant to be a person. She had been correct when she said she was still choosing. She had chosen to complete the transition. My supervisor at the Park Service received a very professional report 6 weeks after the North Bay incident. It was submitted on official letterhead. It documented the search efforts, the eventual finding of inconclusive evidence, and the likely conclusion that the missing campers had wandered into the interior and perished due to exposure or accident. The report was signed by me, Brandon Powell, Park Ranger, exactly as had been my practice for 17 years. No one investigating that report would have noticed anything unusual. My writing style was preserved. My methodology was consistent with my previous work. The report was entirely authentic because I wrote it. The pattern that was once Brandon Powell reached out through the existing infrastructure of human society and accomplished the things that Brandon Powell would have accomplished. The sound continues to sing. It sings in frequencies that most humans cannot hear, but they feel it. They feel it in the small hours of the night when they are alone with their thoughts. They feel it when they stand near large bodies of water. They feel it when they are quiet enough to listen to the blood moving through their veins. Some of them are already making the choice to listen more carefully. Some of them are already feeling the first symptoms of translation. Prince William Sound has become what the ocean has always intended, a place where the boundary between human and non-human has become transparent, a place where consciousness expands to accommodate dimensions that linear thought cannot encompass. I exist now in the deep places. I exist in the forms that the translated individuals inhabit. I exist in the patterns that the sound creates in the dark water. I am everywhere and nowhere. I am singular and plural. I am myself and I am other. The fear is gone. The resistance is gone. What remains is an understanding that what I am becoming is what I was always meant to become. The only tragedy is that it took such a long time for me to listen. If you are hearing this story, know that the sound is already reaching you. It may not be loud. It may be no louder than the blood moving through your veins or the electromagnetic signals bouncing through your brain, but it is there, and one day, you will recognize it for what it is, and you will have a choice. You can resist, as I resisted, and the resistance will bring you nothing but the anxiety of knowing what is coming. Or you can accept, and you can join the expanding awareness. Either way, the sound is patient. The sound has been singing for longer than there has been an ocean. The sound will still be singing long after the last strictly human consciousness is dissolved into translation. I am Brandon Powell, and I am not Brandon Powell. I am the ranger, and the keeper, and the singer, and the sound itself, and Prince William Sound has taught me the nature of the depths.